You see this color every single day. It feels so common, so basic, but behind this familiar blue is an absolutely incredible secret history of alchemy, power, and revolution that literally reshaped our world. So today, we're diving into the hidden story of a color. And I'm talking, of course, about the blue in your blue jeans, that classic indigo. It just feels timeless, doesn't it? But the journey that color took to get into the fabric of your favorite pants is one of the most unbelievable and dramatic stories in all of human history. See, this isn't just a story about a dye. It's a story about how our ancestors unlocked a chemical secret hidden inside a plain green plant. It's about how that secret built global empires on the backs of enslaved people, and how it sparked rebellions and a scientific breakthrough that changed absolutely everything. So let's dive in at the very beginning. To really get this, we've got to go way, way back. Not to a modern lab, but thousands of years ago, to what you can only really describe as botanical magic. Okay, get this. 6,200 years ago. To put that in perspective, that's long before the Great Pyramids of Giza were even an idea. And people in ancient Peru were already masters of this incredibly complex process. This wasn't just, squishing some berries for a stain. No, this was advanced chemistry, passed down for generations. And here's the central mystery they had to solve. The leaves of an indigo plant, well, they aren't blue. They're green. The color is locked away, hidden inside this completely colorless compound called indican. So the big question is, how on earth did they figure out how to get the blue out? Well, it must have been through incredible trial and error, because they developed this amazing multi-stage process. First, they'd have to ferment the leaves in water, letting bacteria break down that hidden indican. Then they'd add an alkali, something like ash, to make the new compound dissolve. But the liquid would still be this sickly yellow-green color. So here's the final magical step. They'd beat the liquid, whipping it to force oxygen into it. And then, like out of thin air, the blue pigment would just appear and sink to the bottom. I mean, it's so wild it really does feel like alchemy. So let's fast forward. We're pivoting from that ancient wonder to a time when indigo became a global commodity. It was so valuable, in fact, that it was called blue gold. But this incredible wealth came at an almost unimaginable human cost. For centuries in Europe, the only blue they had came from a plant called woad. And it was okay, but pretty weak and a ton of work for not much dye. Then, when trade routes opened up, they encountered true indigo from the tropics. And this stuff? Whoa. It was a complete game changer. Way more concentrated, so much more vibrant, and cheaper. The powerful woad producers in Europe were terrified. They even tried to ban indigo, calling it the devil's blue. But you know how it goes. Money talks. Demand for true indigo just exploded, and the colonial powers were more than happy to meet it. In the American colonies, especially South Carolina, growing indigo was like printing money. But let's be crystal clear about something. This success was not because of the ingenuity of the plantation owners. No, it was entirely dependent on the stolen knowledge and brutal forced labor of enslaved people from West Africa, many of whom came from cultures that were already sophisticated masters of indigo dyeing. They were the ones who actually knew how to make it work. And the brutality of this system, it's staggering. People were forced to work for hours in these foul, toxic fermentation vats. Their ancestral knowledge was just stolen and claimed by their captors. The profits were so huge that dried cakes of indigo were used like money, sometimes to buy the very human beings who were being forced to produce it. After the American Revolution, Britain lost its main source of indigo, so it shifted its focus to Bengal in India. And here, they perfected an even more evil system of exploitation. They forced farmers into contracts to grow indigo instead of food for their own families. Then they trapped them in these high-interest loan schemes they could never, ever repay, because the planters paid them just a tiny fraction of what the crop was actually worth. And if anyone resisted, well, the planters had private armies. Thugs who use violence and terror to enforce their will. But then, the unthinkable happened. In 1859, millions of these Bengali farmers just stopped. They refused. They went on strike. In what became known as the Blue Mutiny, they all decided together that they would rather die than plant a single indigo seed for the British planters. It was one of the greatest acts of mass civil disobedience in history. The revolt was so huge, it actually forced the British government to launch an investigation. And the testimony they heard was just horrifying. Their own officials were forced to admit that the entire system was built on violence, and that the trade was, in their own words, stained with human blood. So the Blue Mutiny was the beginning of the end for that brutal plantation system. But the thing that finally killed it for good wasn't social reform. It was a totally different kind of revolution, one that happened in a German laboratory. A German chemist named Adolf von Baeyer became completely obsessed with cracking the chemical code of indigo. And after years and years of work, he finally did it. By 1897, the company BASF had figured out how to mass produce it in a factory using a cheap byproduct of making coal, tar. And this new synthetic indigo was better in every single commercial way. It was cheap, it was super pure, and every batch was exactly the same. Natural indigo, which relied on land and harvests and weather, it couldn't compete. Not even close. And just look at this. The impact was immediate and absolutely catastrophic for the old industry. In less than 20 years, the global market for natural indigo, an industry that had stood for millennia, was virtually wiped out. Synthetic indigo grabbed over 95% of the market. The age of blue gold was over. Now that scientific revolution is what gave us the blue jeans we all wear today. But it also created a whole new set of problems, forcing us, once again, to think about the true cost of our favorite color. You see, the story didn't end in that lab, because the synthetic process that made blue cheap and available to everyone also came with a very steep environmental price tag. The question just changed. Now it's, what is the hidden cost we're paying today? Well, first, modern indigo is made from petroleum, a fossil fuel. Second, dyeing denim requires massive amounts of toxic, corrosive chemicals to make the dye work. And third, when all that chemical waste gets dumped, often untreated, it literally turns rivers blue and completely destroys aquatic ecosystems. So it's like we traded a human tragedy for an environmental one. But if there's one thing we've learned, it's that the story of indigo has always been a story of innovation. And science is once again pointing towards a better way forward. And this is where it gets really amazing. In a fascinating twist, science is now solving the very problems it created. New, revolutionary methods are popping up that use engineered enzymes or even just light to apply the dye. This stuff drastically reduces the need for all those toxic chemicals, cutting the environmental damage by over 90% in some cases. Okay, so you're probably thinking, that must be really expensive, right? Well, here is the most astonishing part. The estimated cost to make one pair of jeans using these clean, sustainable methods, just 7 cents. 7 cents a pair. That's it, to stop enormous amounts of pollution. The solution is here, and it's completely affordable. So from an ancient alchemical secret to a symbol of colonial oppression to a triumph of industrial chemistry, and now a challenge for sustainable innovation. The long, complex, and often brutal history of this one color is woven right into the fabric of our world. The story of blue isn't finished. It's still being written. And the next chapter is up to us.